What's up guys, welcome back to the Coral Reef Talk. In today's video we're going to be building a stand for the brand new aquarium. Oh, and by the way, the new tank, it's here. Okay, so today is an exciting day because today we are building the stand for the new 125 system that's going here in the new house. So we're out in the garage. Here's a little sample of how the stand is going to be built. So if you're building your own, you can follow along. You can watch this video because I'm going to film the entire thing of me cutting the wood, assemble the stand, and then hopefully in a later video we're going to finish it so it looks more like a piece of furniture, like a cabinet. So I have with me a stand that was built for a 20-gallon tank. Now this is similar to what we're doing today. We're going to build two pieces, one for the top and the bottom, and then the supporting pieces on the inside right here. And we're also going to put some beams in between here for extra support. Because this tank is going to be well over 1,200 pounds once it's full of water and live rock and all of that stuff. So this is kind of the plans. I know you probably can't see them that well, but I have everything written down. It's good to write everything out beforehand and plan everything before you go ahead and cut stuff. Okay, so I went to Lowe's and picked up 10 2x4s. Now I'm going to be using a miter saw to cut these boards, and first things first though, we have to measure the boards that we wrote down in our plans. So I'm going to be measuring for the long edge and the short edge of the two frames for the top and bottom of the stand. So right here I am measuring out the 60 inches and the 21 inches needed for those two boards. So the long board is going to be 60 inches. The short board is going to be 21 inches to fit between the two long boards because there's an 1.5 inch difference that I had to account for so that the short side was exactly 24 inches. So next, once you get your measurements, or once I got my measurements, I went ahead and started cutting the boards to the correct size. So a lot of boards for this project, cutting all the supporting pieces, cutting the pieces for the frames here, cutting everything out so all that is left is the assembly process. So you see the two frames here that are completely cut out, ready to be screwed together. And so what I'm using is the 3-inch deck screws for this project. So I put the long edge on the outside here. And when I first started, I just started to drill straight through, just no pre-drilling anything, and I noticed that the board started to split. So for the rest of the holes, I pre-drilled before each one. So pre-drilling is a good idea for sure when you're building your own stand. Now, when you're pre-drilling and then putting the screws in, of course it's going to take a little bit more time, but it's well worth it because you don't have to worry about splitting the boards. You can see I have an extra screw on this side just because of that split. I've just put two in there, two additional ones, just to make sure it was all fine. The rest of the boards though, I did put 2 screws on each side, pre-drilling along the way. So this is going to be the bottom of the tank stand, and then we're going to do the same thing for the top. So you just put in 2 screws on each side, get your frame built, a nice rectangle 60 inches by 24 inches, 5 foot by 2 foot, and then you do the same thing for the other sides. You're building 2 frames that are exactly the same, so that's gonna be where the tank rests on, or at least the outside edges of the tank. Now with this tank being a rimless full glass, everything is touching the tank. It's not like the tanks with the plastic rim where it only sits on the outside. This tank will rest across the entire tank, so we're going to be building a top for it as well. But here you can see the two frames completely built, ready to be assembled. So I take my support pieces and we're going to start screwing them in on the inside of the frame. Once again, we're pre-drilling this so that we don't split anything. If you want to take the risk and just screw them in, go ahead, but it is a lot better to pre-drill, even though it takes a little bit longer. You can see I'm using a board here to support the vertical board so that I can screw it in, because I am just a one-man show here building this tank. So it can be done by yourself. I would recommend if you have at least one more person to help you out, that would be great. What I'm doing is mainly getting the vertical supports of the stand in place. The stand is going to be 36 inches tall. I originally cut some boards for 30 inches and upon inspection of how high it was versus what the tank would look like on it, I decided that 36 inches for this build is exactly what I wanted. It's the right height for this tank, for it to look nice in the space that it's going in. So once you get your corner pieces in, you can move on to the top frame. So here's the top frame. I'm just wiggling it on to the supports right here, just to get it on. And then once you get the top on, just flip the stand over. And then once you flip the stand over, the frame will fall into place, and then you're ready to screw that frame in, and then you have your basic structure for your aquarium stand. So I flipped the tank stand back over, and you can see this is the basic framework of the stand with the inner supports and the top and bottom frame. You can see how level it is right now. So as soon as I built that, I wanted to make sure it was level, and it's looking pretty good. So the next thing we have to do is add the bracing, the center supports going across the top and the bottom to keep it from flexing, and also we need that to be the support to distribute the weight evenly from the tank, as it's going to sit across the whole top with this piece of plywood. Now I also wanted a platform for the sump to sit on, so I took a piece of plywood that I had cut, put it underneath the stand, and traced out where I'm gonna notch this board so it can fall into place and we could have a flat bottom. So I used a jigsaw to do that, and the jigsaw made light work of this. I mean, it made this part really easy to do. So if you don't have a jigsaw, go out and pick one up. They're not that expensive, but they make your life easier, and you'll see why a little bit later in the video. Right here we're cutting out this piece of plywood so it can go on the inside. This is where the sump is gonna sit. This is where all of my equipment is gonna sit. And once I'm done notching this out with the jigsaw, it should fit nicely and snugly inside the bottom of the stand, and you'll see how it sits there with the boards sitting on that outside frame of the tank stand. So we finished cutting it, and then it just very easily slides right down, put it on the outside edge of the tank, and then it falls right into place. So now there's a nice platform for the sump. But before I screw that down, we have to put in our supports, which I previously cut to fit in between the bottom and the top frame. We're going to put the bottom ones in first so that we can get that plywood on top for the equipment underneath. So this next part is pretty straightforward. You just want to screw the bottom supports into the stand. Now I'm putting a support going across on the far left and the far right up against the leg supports of the tank to give it a little more stability. And then I'm going to evenly space out the other two in between. Now I just need enough supports on the bottom so I can screw that piece of plywood in that's going to hold the tank equipment. And once you get these screws started in the supports, it straightens up the board. That way when you screw it in on the other side, they're pretty straight and they're good to go. So now we put the piece of plywood in that slides right in, and then we just add some screws around the perimeter of this, just screw it in place. Make sure it's nice and solid, that way it'll be good to go once we're finishing everything up and get everything painted. But straightforward, just screw it into your bottom supports and you have the bottom of the stand complete. Now same thing with the top of the stand. We're going to lay out the cross section supports here, so all the way to the left, all the way to the right, right up against the legs to get that support, and then evenly spaced out from there. And then I also added a center support here, and that is the beginning of the mistakes that I'm starting to make. So I put in a center support, and then I laid the top piece of plywood on top of the stand. And I guess I'm just getting so excited about this build that I'm screwing down the plywood to the top, and I still need to have center supports for this, as well as a cutout where the overflow is going to be so I can plumb the tank. And right now it's a nice flat surface, and yes, it's level, and yes, it looks nice, but I forgot some of the important pieces to this build. So right off the bat, you probably spotted that center support there right in the middle, and I was a little frustrated at myself, so I didn't really film myself put that piece in, but I had to do another center support on the other side here, so I filmed how I did that, which is the same process of putting that one in. So when we get to that point, I'll share that with you. But right now I'm putting in the outer support beams or support pieces of wood that just go between the outer side of the frame, so it holds up the frame, because there's going to be so much weight on this that you don't want to build an aquarium stand without having supports on the outside too. You want it to be just as sturdy on the outer edge as well as the inner edge, because the pieces of wood on the inside is where the frame is attached to, and you need something to support the frame once it gets all that weight on it. So these boards are going in between the frame on the outside long edge as well as the outside short edge to keep them in. So you just see me here making sure that I have the right size boards on the right side of the tank, and I'm screwing those in. Now the way that plywood was cut on the bottom, I'm seeing that I probably could have went with a 2x6 on the outside, or the long side and the short side, but I had 2x4s and I was just using all the wood that I had. Now this project with some of the recuts and then adding the center supports, I actually ended up using, I think, 14 2x4s. I initially purchased the 10 2x4s and got things started. This took me a couple days to finish. I worked on it here and there throughout those days, so it's not that difficult to build the stand. It's just making sure that you have everything drawn out, measured out, and cut beforehand, and don't get over excited. I know it's a brand new tank for me, it's a brand new build, so I got very excited once I was getting close towards the end. I thought everything was looking good, and I noticed that I didn't have the overflow cut out so that I could plumb the tank, and I put center supports in, which I didn't need, so I had to correct for that, and I'm going to show you that in just a second. But right here we're adding the plywood to the side. Once we get those outer supports in, it's all about the aesthetics now. I was thinking about adding a door to the side of the tank. The old stand that I had 3 doors. It had 2 doors in the front and a door on the side, so you could easy access things and slide like the sump in, replace the sump. But for this one, I just wanted a simple stand. I made the doors are going to be nice and big for this, so I don't think it'll be a problem. So I'm just screwing in the plywood that I had previously cut for me. Lowe's does a good job with that. They have a saw there, so you can write down your measurements, tell them what you need to cut, and they'll cut it for you, because I didn't have a saw or a table saw, anything big enough to cut sheets of plywood. So we got that side in, and now it's time to screw in the other side. And it's starting to come together. It's starting to look more like a stand now. We're filling in the frame and making it sturdier and stronger. Now this thing, it's heavy duty. The outside supports and the inner supports, along with the center supports, really gonna make this thing strong. It's probably overkill for a 125 gallon tank, and that's fine. I'd rather have something overkill that's gonna definitely hold the weight versus like those particle board stands. Now here's the completed stand, or what I would say semi-complete. We got the plywood on it, but we need those middle supports. So how did I do that? Well, I marked out my 2x4. You can see right here with that red outline. And then it's time to get the jigsaw. So I drilled a few holes down into the plywood first so that I could get the jigsaw in there. And then once I could get the blade of the jigsaw through these holes, it was time to cut out my outline and cut out that little rectangle so that I could fit the 2x4. So you can see the hole here. That's what I did. I just cut out the space for the 2x4 to fit. So I'm gonna have to tilt the stand here and slide in the 2x4 and then gently lower the stand back down. So now the 2x4 is at 36 inches and it's the perfect height for a middle support. And then I'm just going to add the smaller board in the front here as an outside brace. It's also going to work for the centerpiece for where the doors meet together. And then I'm also going to take the plywood and add that to the outside here. So I grabbed the other pieces of that plywood that I had left from the top and bottom of the stand, measured out the left side here, and then the jigsaw once again coming in handy. I can't say it enough. Get yourself a jigsaw if you don't have one. If you're going to build a stand for your aquarium, it works out really well. So I'm cutting out the shape of this plywood to make sure it fits along the outside, and then I'm going to take the board again and I'm going to trace the inside of it and cut out kind of like a U shape because I didn't have one solid board left over that fit the whole length of my stand. So I had these two big pieces. So rather than just putting it on and then cutting out squares, which would have been preferable, this method works as well. So these pieces of plywood are big enough to cut down to shape, and then I just cut out like a U for the left side. So the other side I did the same way, measured out the length and width that I needed, cut it down to the U shape, and I'm going to fit it in between here. And then to cover up and to fill in the gap, I'm going to use a smaller piece of plywood. I'm using pretty much every piece of wood that I purchased, so any scrap boards, anything is coming in handy here. As you see the short board, I just jigsawed out one side and it fits perfectly in the middle here, and that's actually where the doors are going to meet. And it's coming along very nice. So here's some photos of somewhat finished product, but as you know, I did not leave room for the overflow. So I'm going to take the same method that I did with that 2x4 middle support to get the overflow. You see that it's missing in this photo, and we're going to have to measure the tank, find out where the overflow is, how deep it is, how wide it is, or the length and width of it, and then I will measure for that. And then once I measure that, I'm just going to make my mark on the plywood and basically double check my measurements and make sure everything is in the right place before I go ahead and make my holes here. And then I'm going to take the jigsaw again and work on cutting out this shape, but I have to undo the front boards that I had previously put on because that middle support is in the way. So to get to it, I have to loosen these, so I have to rewind a little bit to go back in and fix my mistake. But all is well. You can see the jigsaw saving the day again. Not a sponsor or anything, but hey, get yourself a jigsaw. So I have to take out the back braces as well. And they just slide over to the side and they pull right out, and then I can get to that, I can get in there and cut it the rest of the way without any of those cross braces being in the way, and I can make sure I get the perfect cut along that 2x4 edge. And it's just a rectangle, it's not a very big rectangle, so it's still going to hold the weight. So I cut a little angle in that one support and fit it back down in the hole, and screwed it back in, fastened everything back together, and then put that outside support, had to drill at an angle, get that up in there under the top frame. So once I got everything back together on the outside, as far as the back support, it was time to get the cross-section supports underneath, and I just lined that up with the outside edge of the hole for the overflow, and then just screwed those in. So now I have good support underneath the top of the stand. There's not going to be any sagging. The tank's weight is going to be fully distributed across the entire stand, not just the edges, because like I said, this is a full glass tank. There's no plastic rim on it. It's only Euro braced at the top, so it's all glass that's going to be sitting on top of this thing, so the weight has to be evenly distributed across the entire stand. So it was a little challenging putting these braces back in, holding that plywood back, but it was flexible enough to let me get in there, and then easy enough to screw the plywood back in, making sure it all still lined up. Alright, so now underneath looks like this. Instead of one center support, it's got the two supporting on either side, these two evenly spaced. This is to compensate for the overflow coming out through there, and it's the same on that side, so that should distribute the weight just fine. This is what that piece looks like, where I had to cut an angle there so that when I run pipe down, I can run pipe here and do 45s and angle off of that. So I still have some kind of structural support. That's the idea. I guess if it's too long, once we go to plumb the tank, I can always take it off, I guess, but we'll see when we get there. That way I didn't mess up anything down there with my holes. But that's it right now. Now we're gonna sand it down, stain it, paint it, and we're gonna make some doors for the front. Now make sure you're here for the next video, because in the next video we're gonna add the outside trim to the tank. We're gonna stain it, we're gonna paint it, and make this thing look like a beautiful piece of furniture. So if you're brand new to the Coral Reef Talk and you're just now jumping on this Reef Tank Rebirth series, go ahead, I encourage you to click that subscribe button and select the bell icon so that you're notified when that next video drops. Let me know in the comments below what you think of this tank build. Let me know if you've built your own stand before. If you have any tips or tricks for the community regarding building your own tank, leave that in the comment section below. And thank you so much for checking out this video. Thank you for all the support that you give. Remember, hit that subscribe button if you're not once again, and I'll catch you next time on the next episode of the Coral Reef Talk.